Welcome to Beerdy, Bruce Lee Central, the biggest Bruce Lee channel on the planet.
Hey everybody, it's Beerdy here. What's going on, guys? Okay, so back in the 90s, there was a rumor that Bruce Lee was traveling around the United States from state to state and asking senseis in karate dojos to spar with their students. And he would do this for years and years and years, since the middle of the 60s and right until 1973. So this was just a rumor, a myth, until a decade later, Jim Kelly confirmed this to be true. Now, who's Jim Kelly? Well, he is the former undisputed middleweight world champion. And Bruce Lee actually got in contact with Jim Kelly for the movie Enter a Dragon because he was so impressed by what Jim Kelly did in the 70s in martial arts. So Jim Kelly actually joined Bruce Lee in traveling around the United States and sparring with karate students and karate senseis. So what Bruce Lee did was go from dojo to dojo, and he would ask the sensei politely if he could spar with their best student. And this could go two ways. One way is that the sensei simply said no, and Bruce Lee would say, okay, thank you, and then he would move on. And the other one is that he would say yes, and he would spar with their best student. There's also a third outcome that would happen sometimes, and that's the sensei actually fighting with Bruce Lee or sparring with Bruce Lee. And this was rare, but it did happen. Okay, so after Jim Kelly confirmed this to be true, he also confirmed that he would go with Bruce Lee. He would actually join Bruce Lee on their travels. Okay, so here's Jim Kelly in his own words. Let's listen to Jim Kelly.
I enjoyed working with John Saxon.
Yeah.
John Saxon's great actor. I was very fortunate to have, in my opinion, the greatest martial artist ever lived.
Yeah.
Bruce Lee. I'll talk to you about that later. Probably have questions for me on that. But in my opinion, I tell you right now, I fought the best. I trained with the best. I know great martial artists, and there's never been anybody, in my opinion, like Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee was unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely unbelievable, guys. You don't know how great this guy was. People don't really know. Just talking about actor, or
Right.
I'm talking about martial artist.
Right.
Guy who knew his stuff.
Mm-hmm.
This guy was. There's stories I know about Bruce Lee that I don't even share because I have respect for the people, other people in martial arts, and it's not necessary for me to name names. I know who Bruce Lee sparred with.
Yeah.
I know. They won't tell you, but I know people he sparred with. I never mention their names either, but Bruce Lee was untouchable.
Yeah. Is it in the book? Is it in your book?
No,
Oh, come on, man.
I mention this, but I never tell the names.
Can I get everybody to swear to secrecy? Can you say one name?
No.
Can you mix them up? Can you have a jumble of a name?
I have too much. I have too much respect.
Can I guess?
No, you probably could.
Yeah, I
guess.
probably could. Because
sure
I know a
you
lot
could,
of people
but
he sparred
I
with
wouldn't
as well.
confirm it.
Yeah, there you go. That's fair enough.
But
You're a good man.
I just have too much respect for other guys.
Yeah.
In martial arts.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
But he was the speed, the timing, the technique, unbelievable. Bruce was the type of guy that he would spar with you. He could spar with a guy. I'm not saying whoever, John Doe. John Doe the great, great champion. Okay? John Doe.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't matter what size. You can be a lightweight, middleweight, heavyweight, didn't matter to Bruce. Bruce was lightweight. What was Bruce? 155?
If he
Well,
wet,
145,
soaking wet.
145.
Yeah, soaking wet, yeah.
Like one, maybe.
Yeah.
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 And how tall?
5'7", maybe?
5'7", no more. He could spar with anybody,
Yeah.
any size. Didn't matter what size you were. And he would spar with you, and hands and feet. And then he said, okay, let's just go hands. Just hands. Guy was incredible.
That's
I'm
kung fu.
going to leave it at that.
Okay, so there you go. There's Jim Kelly in his own words. And Jim Kelly and Bruce would travel around the United States and they would spar against different karate students in different dojos. So you may ask, why did Bruce Lee do this? Well, Bruce Lee's goal in life was to assimilate as much martial arts as possible. He wanted to fight against different styles, against different people, different schools, different dojos, different senseis, etc., etc. Actually, Bruce Lee had been doing this from way back in the day in Hong Kong and in China. He would go around schools. That's how we actually learned Northern Praying Mantis. He actually got taught that from the Shaolin monks in China. And not only that, but he was taught a lot of different styles in Chinese Kung Fu and in the United States within karate, taekwondo, aikido, etc., etc. He just wanted to assimilate as many martial arts styles as possible. He wanted to become the complete martial artist. That was his goal. And by 1973, Bruce Lee was the ultimate martial artist. He had assimilated as many styles as he could, and he had been doing this for like 15, 16, 17 years now. And he created Jeet Kune Do, which was his own style, a style without a style, sort of speaking. If you know about Jeet Kune Do, it's not supposed to be a style. That's the whole point of Jeet Kune Do. It's a style that doesn't have a style. Your point is that you have to adapt to the situation, and every situation is different. That's the whole point of Jeet Kune Do. And so we get to the point of present day. So when I started my channel, immediately I got mails from all over the country. People that had stories about Bruce Lee, meeting him, former karate students, former karate senseis, and just friends of Bruce Lee from back in the day. And that's cool, you know. I get these kinds of mails every day. But occasionally I would get mails from former students and former senseis that confirmed what Jim Kelly was saying, that Bruce Lee would travel around the US and challenging karate students to sparring matches. And recently, I got contacted by a true martial arts icon, a true karate icon. Now, he asked for his name to be anonymous. He didn't want any of this. He didn't want any attention put forward to this. He didn't even want to tell this story. But his reasoning is that he wants to tell the story before it's too late, before he can't tell the story anymore. And so I said, okay, I'm going to keep this as anonymous as possible. All I'm going to say is that he is a true karate icon. And if I mentioned his name, you would know who he was. Let's put it that way. So we talked for a while, and he confirmed that not only he, but several of his colleagues, senseis around the country, had been visited by Bruce Lee. And one of the incidents that happened that I had no idea that this happened. Bruce Lee went to a dojo and he met up with the sensei of that dojo. I'm not going to say his name. And he asked if he could spar with his strongest student. And the sensei said, no, you're not going to spar with my best student. You're going to spar against me. Because what had happened is that the rumor had spread. People knew that Bruce Lee was going around from dojo to dojo and sparring against their best student. So now that sensei actually wanted to fight Bruce Lee. And the sensei was kind of eager, you know, to kind of defend karate, because this was embarrassing the sport of karate, that Bruce Lee would beat up these students one by one by one by one. And so he kind of was like a bit angry, you know, a bit aggressive, and he wanted to spar against Bruce Lee. So Bruce Lee, of course, he said, "Yeah, let's do it." And the fight didn't last long, and Bruce Lee basically humiliated him, and that's when shit hit the fan, because his students didn't like the fact that Bruce Lee humiliated their teacher, their sensei. I mean, they looked upon this guy as if he was a god to them, you know. And one of the students is the one guy that actually told him what happened. So he was one of the students that didn't attack Bruce Lee, because what happened is that, like he said, 7 or 8 guys attacked Bruce Lee. They ran up to him after Bruce Lee. He put his arm out to like pick up the sensei that was down on the floor, and that's when the students got triggered and they started attacking Bruce Lee. So one of the guys came from the side and he wanted to tackle Bruce Lee down on the floor, and Bruce Lee jumped over this guy, and that's when Bruce Lee saw like 7 or 8 students running towards him. They were attacking him, and he had that one guy on his side. So what happened next is really, really interesting, because the guy that was watching this, one of the students that were sitting back and watching this, he said that Bruce Lee went into a stance. Now, Bruce Lee didn't use stances in fights. That wasn't common for him. He only would use stances if it was serious, if it was a serious fight. So the only stance Bruce Lee could go into was the northern praying mantis stance. And the reason he would do this was because there was multiple opponents. And that's why he got into the northern praying mantis. Now, the guy that told me about this, he didn't know what northern praying mantis was. He just said Bruce Lee went into a stance. But I'm 100% sure that he went into the northern praying mantis style, because I know what happened. Because he said that just in a few seconds, it happened so fast that all of the students were grasping for air. They were grasping their neck and grasping for air. And actually, in actuality, they weren't grasping for air. They thought they were grasping for air. In actual fact, they got hit in a pressure point in their throat. So they could breathe fine, but it was the pressure point that got hit in their throat that incapacitated them. And it's a well-known pressure point. If you're a Kung Fu specialist like Bruce Lee, you could use something like that to incapacitate your opponent without injuring them. It's just basically a pressure point. And he said that when Bruce Lee went into his stance, he was holding 2 fingers up. And I mean, when I first heard this, I was so blown away, because, okay, so Bruce Lee goes into the northern praying mantis stance, and he holds 2 fingers up. And he uses these 2 fingers to hit the pressure points of 7 or 8 students at once. So we're talking like ba 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 ba, like bam. And because he said that this whole thing lasted just for seconds, and they were all on their knees, and they were like holding their neck, and they were like, they thought they couldn't breathe, because it feels like you couldn't breathe. It feels like it, but in actuality, you can breathe just fine. But it feels like you're getting choked because you're hit in a special pressure point in the throat. So Bruce Lee took out half of this dojo, half of these guys, in a matter of seconds by using 2 fingers. So this just reminds me of when Goku fights Trunk. You know, with Trunk has the sword and Goku has that 1 finger. Yeah, it's like Goku versus Trunks with 1 finger. And so 2 fingers, he managed to take out that half of that dojo with 2 fingers. And basically, the reason Bruce Lee did that was because he didn't want to injure these guys. These were students. He didn't want to injure anyone. He didn't want to injure the sensei or anyone. He wasn't there to fight people. He was there to try to assimilate karate, and he was attacked. He just defended himself in the most amazing way possible by incapacitating his enemies. And and after that, I mean, these guys, Bruce Lee actually left, so he didn't stick around. And Bruce Lee just went out the door and left after they were incapacitated. So he told me that all of the students, just like after a couple of minutes, they got up again and they were fine. And they were just shaking their heads because nobody, literally nobody, knew what hit them. They didn't know what happened. They were just scratching their heads and what the heck just happened, because it went so fast. It happened so fast that it was just a matter of seconds, just bam, 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 and they were just incapacitated. And so I went on to ask this guy, why now? Why did you share this story now? You could have just told us 20, 30 years ago. And he said that he was embarrassed. He was just embarrassed by this whole thing. He he was the sensei of the dojo, and he just, he didn't want anyone to think that karate was, especially his own students and the people that were living there, that to know that something like this happened to his karate students. He didn't want, karate to be besmirched as a sport, as a martial arts. And Bruce Lee's goal was never to besmirch karate as a sport. He was actually there to learn karate by sparring with his opponents, and he had to take them out one by one because he was attacked. So he said that he didn't want to tell this story. He actually doesn't even want to tell this story now, but he wants to tell the story before it's too late, before we never get this story at all, because he's really old now. So he just wanted to share this before the story was gone forever, kind of. So I'm really appreciative that he told us the story now. He had the courage to tell us what happened. And the thing is that all of the students that were a part of this class, they've all been quiet for so long. None of them has, I mean, because they were probably protecting their sensei. That's why they never told this story to anyone. They just waited for the sensei to tell us the story himself. So yeah, there you go. Bruce Lee versus half a dojo of angry karate students. And I mean, I'm so impressed by Bruce. Not that he took them out. That's not what impresses me. What impresses me is that he stayed calm and he decided to incapacitate them without injuring them. Staying true to his philosophy to the very end. That's Bruce Lee. That's the guy that I respect so much. If Bruce Lee had just punched this guy and broken their jaws, and he could have done that. He could have just taken all of them out, no problem. But the fact that he did it in this way, in this respectful manner, just goes to show what a guy Bruce Lee was. If you're ever wondering who Bruce Lee was, just tell them this story. And this describes him at the best, at the core. This is fighting without fighting. Actually, that's what this is. He took them out, and he didn't even have to fight. He just used these pressure points to incapacitate them, and he just peacefully walked out the door because he understood that he wasn't welcome there. And I would have hoped that this sensei had contacted Bruce and apologized for what happened, because Bruce deserved an apology. But at the time, karate was so gigantic in the US. It was so huge. Like everybody was practicing karate at the time. And Bruce Lee was just this Asian guy, and it's not until later that Bruce Lee got the respect that he has today. Back in those days, Bruce Lee, believe it or not, man, there was a lot of racism. There was a lot of, um, uh, people being protective of karate, not wanting outside influence, especially from the East, from Asia. Believe it or not, guys, those were the times, man. Those were the times, and people like Bruce Lee, man, they had to fight. They had to fight to get through. Um, when Bruce Lee opened his dojos in San Francisco, there was a lot of resistance, man. A lot of resistance. What is this guy doing? He's opening dojos that are not karate dojos. Who is this guy? Who do you think he is? Stuff like that. So Bruce Lee had to fight adversity his whole life, and he did it in this respectful manner. And that goes to show the character of Bruce Lee. We know that if Bruce Lee wanted, he could have had like hundreds of belts and trophies uh, during the 60s and 70s. He wasn't interested. Even Chuck Norris said that whatever sport Bruce Lee had chosen, he would have won everything in that sport. It's that simple. uh, you know. So Bruce Lee, just he wasn't interested in accolades and diplomas and trophies and belts and this. He just wasn't interested. He was interested in becoming the most complete martial artist that ever lived. He wanted to assimilate as many martial arts as possible, and that's what he did. And when he died in 1973, he was the most complete martial artist that has ever lived, and probably that will ever live. Okay, so there you go, guys. Thank you for listening, and see you next time. Bye.
Was.